locally. So today's lecture is about how we can have a healthy relationship with ourselves. I guess I really have to hold it really close and try to put it really sorry. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. So today's topic, you can't, right? I have to hold it. Like right here. Oh my God. That's not funny. Oh wow, yeah. Okay, let's start that. So today's topic is about how we can have a healthy and productive relationship with ourselves for the sake of Allah. And this is a topic that I find we hear a lot about from the Western perspective, and there's so much self-help information out there in the world that we live in. We're always reading the next self-help book on Psychology Today, or all those things that we're subscribed to, and we're trying to understand how we can view ourselves and how we can really have a happy and healthy life by understanding who we are and how we can relate to ourselves. And so we need to try to understand this topic within our deen and within the Islamic framework, because for us everything goes back to our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so it can't be two separate entities where it's like, my relationship with myself and my relationship with Allah. And it's important that all of these things are intertwined and brought back to serve that purpose, which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to improve our state for His sake. And so we live in a world today where, we read a lot of stuff, but sometimes we have to constantly be filtering through it, right? That goes with Islam a little bit, that doesn't go with Islam, especially in the age, in the world of narcissism. I mean, I'm sure some of you have heard a lot about now that's on the rise, because there's just this concept of self-worship, right? So when we think of how we should view ourselves or how we should relate to ourselves, unfortunately, if we don't understand it in the right way, we can fall down that track where we become, obsessed with me, myself, and I. And so, inshallah, I hope today to talk about some concepts that can help us understand how I can still have a beautiful relationship with myself in a way that is balanced, in a way that is healthy, in a way that makes me happy, and in a way that pleases Allah ultimately and helps us, strive towards Him in the best way. So this is a huge topic because it's what's the common denominator in all your relationships? It's whether it's with you or Allah, you and Allah, you and your family, you and your loved ones. It's you, right? It's yourself. That's the common thing. That's the focal point, I guess. And so this is the tool that we use to interact. This is the tool that we use to strive in our life and to ultimately worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think it's really important that we understand who is this you, right? And so the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, know yourself to know Allah. And he said, man arafa nafsahu, arafa rabbahu, right? So whoever knows himself will know Allah. What does that mean to know ourselves, right? And this is really the first step that we need to take in order to know how we can have a relationship with ourselves, right? You know how they say you can't love someone until you know them, right? And you hear a lot about like loving yourself. Well, how do I love myself if I don't even know who am I? What makes up me? Not from the perspectives that we know. What does Allah say about me? How does Allah say I should view me? Because we go back to the Quran and we go back to the Sunnah and everything, right? We have to go back to Allah and the Quran and the Sunnah about what to eat, how to pray, how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But how should I view myself? How should I relate to myself? How should I talk to myself? How should I interact with me? I mean, I'm the one that goes through this. This is the common thing in everything I do, whether I'm at work, I'm talking, I'm interacting, I'm enjoying my life, I'm using me, right? So knowing ourselves is the first step. And so who are we, right, in terms of Islam? And so to understand this, we have to go and see what Allah taught us about ourselves, right? So in the Western concept, there's the emphasis on the mind, right? body and how the mind is the driving force. With Islam, the self is much more complete, you know, because of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows us and will never leave any important entity out of you know, who we are. And so that's why until today there's still so much research. I mean, now they're diving into the East to try to derive more ways to understand who we are, right? Because they know that it's not complete. I mean, every theory that you study in psychology, it only addresses one aspect of yourself, right? It only addresses a certain facet of who you are. And that's why most of the time psychologists have to have an eclectic approach, which is they have to use this theory while using this theory in order to approach the person, because you know, you can't just focus on the mind and you can't just focus on you know, certain other aspects, the neurological aspects. You have to focus on a person as a whole, or else you're not doing them justice. And Allah has honored us, and He did do us justice in creating us, and He has created us with all the facets that we need to worship Him and to return to Him, but also to have a beautiful journey on the way back to Him. But we need to learn how to use these tools in the right way, according to the way that He wants us to use them. And this is the first foundation of anything, is that we have to really own the fact that if I want to do anything great in life, I have to understand how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to understand Him. How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want me to view that concept? You know, everything should go back to that foundation, because then it lacks truth. And we should be loyal to the truth, right? We should seek out the truth. It's not just about what, you know, what's the next great thing I can learn. No, what is truthful? And, you know, truth has to do with our fitrah, what matches our fitrah is our true state, right? And it's amazing because in therapy, one of the main goals is to help the client shed the layers, the false layers that they've accumulated, you know, on themselves. So Allah created us to have this natural state, right? To go through life in this natural state and to, inshallah, arrive back to Him in a natural state, in a pure state, right? With a qalb that's saleen, right? A sound heart. But on this journey, we take on layers of, you know, that cover that truth. And so when you know yourself, you will recognize those layers, and you know that you need to shed those layers, because you want to return to Allah with that natural state, right? But not only that, I mean, that's the main concept, but why do we have to go through life carrying all that baggage, right? I mean, the Rasul sometimes said, seek that which benefits you, right? Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to return to Him with that sound heart, right? And He wants us to return, He wants us to have the tools to know how to return to Him and how to get Jannah. But He also wants us to live the best quality of life, right? And He prescribed us with everything we need to have that quality of life, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in every way, to serve all the facets of ourselves, right? So let's talk about these facets, inshallah. So you have the self, right? So this is the Islamic concept of what makes us up. So Western concept will focus on the mind, the body, you know, all about the neuropsychological components, and basically we're very biologically driven in the Western concept, right? Islam, it says no. No, you have the self, but that self is made up of your mind, it's made up of your body, it's made up of your ego-containing self. That's where you could say nafs al-amara bis-su', that nafs, that part of the nafs that wants to serve itself, right? That's your ego. And then you have your spiritual part, right? And so we're designed for that spiritual heart to be the leading force of all of those entities. Unfortunately, we live our lives with, most of the time, one of the other three leading, right? Either our physical self, either our mind, either our nafs, our ego, right? Leading the way, and our spiritual heart is just like tagging behind or, you know, following. But in order for us to really have that life that fits our natural state, that fits our peaceful state, our spiritual heart is the one that needs to be the leading force. And one crucial way to, I mean, I like to look at it like, one way I like to look at it is that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us signs everywhere. I mean, if you look at the planets, right, and you look at how they revolve around the sun, If the planets revolved around anything else, there would be chaos. Because the sun is the only, it's the only one with the strongest gravitational force, meaning that all the other planets don't have a strong enough gravitational force to sustain anything else revolving around it. It wouldn't be able to pull anything around it. They would fall, right? So if the planets revolved around anything else, there'd be chaos in the world, right? And ultimately, that is exactly how our life is. If our spiritual heart, which revolves around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is not the leading force in our lives, we're going to always be in a state of agitation, whether you are conscious of it or unconscious of it. Because sometimes, most of the agitation in our life, sometimes we're not even aware that we're agitated, but you could tell in certain things, patterns of behaviors that you might realize later, or certain things that are happening in your relationships, but there's a state of agitation there. I mean, you have people who go to therapy and they have no quote unquote, like, I guess, identifiable problems, right? So they might say, financially I'm okay, They might say that my kids are fine, they're happy, everything's fine, I'm in a healthy relationship, physically I'm good, but I just don't know. There's a void. I have a void. These are people who are coming into therapy because they don't know what that void is, right? And so we have so much to offer in understanding the self and in understanding who we are. And and when I'm doing my research or when I'm understanding like Islamic psychology, it kind of almost boils my blood to know that, like, they're diving into all these Eastern literature and all these things because they know that we're lacking. So they're trying to get what benefits, what can explain ourselves in a more complete sense. And knowing that, knowing Islam, we have so much to offer, but we don't own our deen. We don't own it, and we don't go back to it. We don't look at it as the foundational cure for everything. We just say it's on the side. Almost like what we do with our spiritual heart. It's on the side. My mind knows better. My physical self knows better. My nafs knows better. I know what is best for myself. So we need to realize, in order to know how you can better serve yourself, you need to know what you're serving, and you need to know which part of yourself you need to be serving with what. So your spiritual heart is what fuels your soul, and everything else should be serving that. Because your soul is what returns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your soul is the only eternal thing out of all of those components, right? And the spiritual heart is the only thing that fuels that soul. So instead, what we're doing is we're using everything else to maybe serve the mind, the physical self, our nafs, right? But now that we've understood this is who we are, right? We said the first thing is that we have to know ourselves, right? Because to know, you have to know yourself to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now we know ourselves. This is how Allah designed us, that our spiritual heart should be the leading force. And one of the best proofs of this is in prayer, right? When you're in prayer, because we live in a world where the mind is like the ultimate thing, right? Everything is about the mind, and we almost worship the mind in a sense. But look at sujood. Sujood is the closest position you are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But look at sujood, what is higher? This area in your brain is the frontal lobe, right? This is the part of the brain that differentiates us from animals. This is the part of the brain that holds the highest intellect. It's your executive functioning, it's the planning, decision making, all the functions that differentiate us from any other being, right? It's what makes us on the top of the food chain, it's what makes us the highest, most advanced creation, right? And subhanAllah, in sujood, you are putting that most advanced, highest part to the floor, right? In submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but yet your heart is still higher than that. What does that tell us? That is the perfect proof of who we are. That our heart is higher than our mind. And we have to understand this because we live in a world where we're constantly absorbing information, always. Like, we want to read the next best thing. Facebook, I think I learn about every subject every day on Facebook. I mean, we should all be scholars, because you go on Facebook and you learn about every single thing, and it's just, subhanAllah, we think that we're doing, and when you walk away and you're like, wow, I learned a lot. But what does it mean anything? Because your heart, the most important entity of who you are, was not served in the right way. It's an illusion. It's an illusion. We live in, sometimes we, subhanAllah, we're deceived, We think that we're doing ourselves justice. But how can you do yourself justice when you don't know who you are? And you don't know what parts of yourself you should be serving? And so this spiritual heart, unfortunately, is malnourished, And so if we start shifting our vision, we start shifting our perspective of who we are, and we look at ourselves as spiritual, as Allah created us primarily as spiritual beings who are, coming back to Him with other tools that we need to survive, but to serve ultimately this part of ourselves that returns back to Him, right? Imagine now everything that you'll be doing. See, everything starts with a shift in view, right? Everything starts with a shift in perception. Because the truth is our perception sometimes gets flawed, right? And our views get flawed until you learn and you understand, wait a minute, I've been looking at myself the wrong way. It's like when you kind of get to know somebody a little bit better, right? You didn't know them initially, and then you get to know them, and you're like, wow, I see them so differently now. I hope that we can start to see ourselves differently too, as for who we are, the truth, right? And so this is the beginning of how we can start shedding these false layers that we accumulate, that cover up our fitrah, that cover up our natural state. By knowing yourself, you know the tools that you have to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's almost like, a person who is always in their head, or people who are not really emotional, they never really felt, And the first time they after maybe going to therapy for a long time or something, they start to feel, they're like, wow, I'm not in my head anymore. I'm actually starting to feel, this, whatever emotion that they were lacking, they didn't never learn how to maybe be empathetic, but it's almost like a recognition within yourself, that exists, Well, that's how it is. Allah put that in us. That spiritual heart holds the divine spark that Allah put in us already, it's in us. Allah would never create us and say, good luck finding me. He already put something in us to help that pull, when I think of the planets and how they have that pull, that's what keeps them. Well, Allah put within us that strong pull as well, that should always keep us longing for Him, but the problem is that pull needs to be strengthened, and that part of ourselves needs to be fed. And so that's the first aspect, is knowing ourselves, recognizing yourselves as spiritual beings, and that spiritual heart, that part of ourselves should be the leader. And when you're in a constant state of agitation, that you're feeding one of those other entities more than you're really serving that part of yourself. And so the next thing is, okay, now we know who we are, right? We know these are the aspects of ourselves. How should we treat ourselves? And so this is an interesting concept, because logically we might apply these concepts to other people, but when it comes to ourselves, we're like, oh, well, yeah, I am somebody, it's hard to kind of apply what you apply to other people to yourself, but think about it. When you have a child, or when you have your family members, or when you're given any gift in your life, right? What is it? It's an amana from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so you are held accountable into how, with regards to how you treat it. And so we're taught to what? Be compassionate. We're taught to love others, right? To do unto others what we would ourselves. We're taught to treat people with ihsan, with excellence. We're taught to be sincere, right? Be truthful with others. But we have to apply all of those things to ourselves. And actually, it's until you really learn to apply those things with yourself can you truly understand what it's like to genuinely apply it to other people. Because you know how it feels. But if you're constantly, this self that Allah gave you, who you are, is a gift. It's a gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to you. So it is the ultimate trust. And so, how they say you can't give what you don't have? This is so true, because you have to fuel yourself constantly. And if you are not equipped, and you're not prepared, or you're not you're not taking care of yourself, you're going to be unable to fully provide others with the best version of you, right? You can still help others, but you're not going to have ihsan in your ability to help others, excellence. And so with yourself, I mean, this is the biggest gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I mean, it's everything you need to serve Him, right? So you have to give it attention. And just as you are taught to love people for the sake of Allah, just as you are taught to attribute everything that you have to Allah, you have to almost flip that perspective back on you and view yourself as an entity that is a trust as well. So loving yourself, because you have to love the gift, right? And this is you are unique, and you hear this stuff all the time, but we don't hear it from the Islamic perspective. I'm sure you guys have heard it all the time, you're special, you're unique, embrace the new you, and all these things you hear, the dialogue that's out there in the self-help world. But really, I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves us so much, and He's honored us, and He has given us all of these things about ourselves, and we almost just neglect it to the side and looking at everything else. But He wants us to take care of ourselves, because this is the part of ourselves we are going to use to help others, to serve, and you can't truly understand, like, how they say, you have to really love yourself in order to know how to love someone else. And I always think of the story of when the Rasul told Umar radiallahu anh, that he does not, he has to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Rasul more than he loves himself in order for him to have true iman. And Umar didn't say, okay, I love Allah and I love you. He had to go back. He didn't think he could do that initially. What does that say? This is proof that Umar loved himself, right? And then he came back and he said, I love Allah and I love you, Rasulullah, more than I love myself, right? But so, and the reason I'm saying this is because I know that there are some concepts, Western maybe, I don't really like the term Western, but I'm just going to use it for now, but Western concepts that we learn that we're just like, oh, is that really Islamic? Is that really, is that really accurate within our deen? And so, it's something that we need to discuss definitely more, because it is in our deen and it's very ingrained in our deen. And love, our deen is full of so many concepts about love, but we don't hear it and we don't talk about it. We don't talk about how loving Allah is, and how He loves us more than we love ourselves, and how Allah wants us to love ourselves, because it's you not loving yourself is you neglecting a gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you. Just as you not loving your child or somebody or a gift that He gave you, a separate gift other than you, it's like you neglecting the gift. So that's definitely something that we need to start shifting our focus, And by love, when you love something, you are more compassionate towards it, right? You are more kind. So even when you make mistakes, it doesn't mean that we can't still be kind to ourselves, We have this concept that, we look at things as like black and white sometimes, and like there's the concept of, hate the sin and not the sinner, but that's in our deen too, and that's the concept of just because we make mistakes doesn't mean our love should be so conditional, where it's I only love myself when I'm doing something good, and I don't love myself when I'm doing something bad. But everything is an experience that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed for us to experience, and so we can experience Him better in a more truthful light, to understand Him better. But if we're constantly having this judgmental view towards ourselves, if someone came to you, this is the best way I understand, if someone came to me with a problem, and I said to them, well, you're bad, or you're this, or you're that, right? They would never be able to truly understand the experience, right? They would never truly understand how they can better improve it. But when we deal with ourselves, it's different. We're harsher with ourselves, right, usually. But what would be so wrong if I took that compassion that I gave to somebody else and I directed it to myself? Would it make me not do better, right? Because these are the things that come in our mind, right? I have to be hard on myself and harsh with myself in order for me to improve, right? These are the beliefs that we've acquired, right? Is that in order for me to improve in my life, I have to be harsh. I can't be compassionate. No, I deserve to be punished, or I deserve, Allah hates me right now. We hear these things, right? Because we have we don't really understand how we should view even our mistakes, right? But if you look at it in context of how you should view with somebody else, I understand it better. This is someone who came up to me and they told me they have made a mistake or they are struggling, and I did that to them and I was harsh, right? I wouldn't be doing them justice. Would you guys think? We wouldn't be justice to them. And so, for me to truly help them, I have to get them to shift the focus off themselves and on the experience, right? On what happened and what led this to happen, or what focus on, once you detach the experience from the person's ego, they're able to basically perceive better. Because once emotion is involved, they can't really understand it. It's all about the attack is on them. And see, this is why self-compassion is so important, right? We think that we have to be harsh with ourselves in order to improve, but in reality, and they did research on this, when you are compassionate with yourself, actually you are able to view the experience with a much more truthful light. And the reason is because when you are harsh on yourself, you are attacking your ego, and your ego is putting up a defense. You are never going to be able to see the experience for what it is if you're harsh with yourself. So these are things we have to correct. And trust me, I know it's not easy because, we live in a world where, you have to hold, we don't want to be people who don't hold themselves into account, right? That's something we fear. We don't want to be people who just do things and don't judge ourselves. Of course, we have to put ourselves into account. But how do we put ourselves into account? In a way that is merciful, in a way that is productive, in a way that is effective. We have to learn how to approach ourselves even when we make mistakes. We can't just say, oh, I am great, or I love myself and Allah has honored me even when, when things are going great, right? When things are going not so great and you don't like certain aspects of yourself, or you're having bad experiences, we still have to learn. We can still look at that experience with compassion, with mercy, because it's all part of His plan as well, I mean, we wouldn't be experiencing that without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowing it, correct? And so, self-compassion, and when I learned about this initially, I was like, okay, well, I don't want to be too easy on myself, that was my initial fear. But like I said, when you have compassion towards another person, that person puts down almost their guard and they're ready to understand, they're ready to perceive, they feel like the humanness of them, of the human quality, which Allah designed us this way. We're vulnerable. And if you're walking around this life thinking that we have to be perfect all the time, then we have not understood the message, is that we are vulnerable and we will make mistakes. And that having that self-compassion towards ourselves is the only way that we can truly learn how to improve. People want to improve all the time, right? But they have all these guards up because, they're afraid that their perfectionist image of themselves is going to fall. So we attach ourselves to an image instead of attaching ourselves, because when you attach yourself to an image, you're being very highly critical of yourself. When you're attaching yourself to the image of where you should be and how you should look and how you should be, what you should be doing, that's you being very highly critical. It's okay to set goals. But when you attach yourself to understanding the experience, deriving meaning from your experiences, deriving lessons from your experiences, if that is your goal, because you know that every experience is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and every experience is there to teach you a lesson, then you start to view things with a little bit more compassion, because your goal is not to protect the ego. Your goal is to, how can I understand this so I can improve myself? How can I understand this so I can understand what message Allah is sending me, right? So I could be a better version of who I am. And so self-compassion, I mean, we could have a whole course about self-compassion and self-mercy and showing mercy to ourselves, because we don't talk about this enough, because we think that having self-compassion equals me not holding myself into account. It means that I'm going to continue sinning, or I'm going to continue doing wrong. It's not like that at all, So definitely having that mercy and reflecting what we give on the good things that we, all the the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're supposed to learn about to try to practice in our lives. It's not just for other people, it's for us as well. And that's something that I hope that we can start to shift our focus with, is that to start saying that I can receive the benefits of those attributes benefits. I can receive the benefits of those good actions as well. And when I do start receiving these benefits, then inshallah I can give them more, because I know how great it feels to receive these benefits. We are too afraid sometimes to receive, right? Because also culturally, right? Sometimes it's not good to receive, and that we just have to be givers, or we're selfish, or but how can you give something that you have not fully experienced, right? How can you truly know what it's like to, be patient with somebody in a true sense? I'm sure we've all been patient, right, at some point in our lives, but maybe we haven't accessed it to the max, or I like to say ihsan because, excelling in it, right? To maybe what we've been given, that patience we've been giving to other people is a fraction of what we could give. If only I knew the benefits of fully being patient, right? So we have to learn to experience things within ourselves. And one of the best ways to do this is that when you read something or when you learn something, try to wait and see the fruits of it within your own self first. Like when you read something about compassion, try that day to show compassion towards yourself first. Try to show love towards yourself first. Patience, and see how you feel when you receive those things from you. It also gives you a sense of empowerment, because how many times in our lives do we wait for other people to do this for us, right? But who says that we can't learn to be patient with ourselves, show love to ourselves, show compassion to ourselves, give strength to ourselves, right? To learn to practice these attributes with ourselves, but instead we become too dependent on the creation to do that for us, right? And this is part of the reason why there's so many problems in relationships as well. It's because we forget our own self. I mean, see, when you know yourself, you start to know what you're capable of. And Allah wants to empower us. So when you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to be loving towards myself, you start needing the creation just a little bit less, right? Because you took something that Allah gave you, and you first you experienced it, and then you learn how to truly give it. But this time when you give it with a more sincere light, it's like knowledge. Can you really teach something that you have not fully learned? You can't. You have to learn it first. And actually, to even teach it, you should experience it first. That's why when I say, we have to practice to absorb and try to implement it within our own lives first, and then, give it. The Sahaba used to come and they would take a few verses, right? Just a few, learn them, implement them, and come back for more. And so until you're able to see the fruits of the knowledge that you're learning within your own life, we're not going, no matter how many times you share it on Facebook, it's not going to benefit, you're not going to benefit from it as much as you would if you just said, okay, let me see how I can experience this to the fullest, this piece of knowledge, that I just learned about today. How can I experience it to the fullest as much as I can before I go share it, before I go try to tell somebody else to do it, or before I try to go give it to somebody else. And I'm not saying don't give. I don't want anyone to walk away and say, you know what, I'm not giving charity anymore until, I don't want anyone to take away these lessons. Please, continue giving and continue, being nice and compassionate, but know that you also are a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you also are worthy of that compassion, of that love and patience. And you also are capable of providing that to yourself. And that's empowering, because when you're in relationships, we're taught in relationships that, especially from the Western view, is that you're half, like say in marriage, for example, you're a half, and that other person's a half, and when you come together, you become whole, right? Islam doesn't say that. And actually, it's interesting because even Western psychology is picking up on this too. We're wholes with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're individuals. We can be whole individuals separate of another person. When you come together, yeah, you're going to overlap. You're going to have some things that are compatible, but you can still be separate people. And we have this enmeshment that we do, right? And this all comes back because we have not learned to empower ourselves. We have not learned how to try to practice what we give to others to ourselves, because we're too interdependent, right? There's healthy dependence, but there's also destructive ones that you see in relationships. And so one of the things that, in learning how to have a relationship with ourselves is learning to empower yourself so that you can always try to be as whole as you can with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and with yourself, so that when you're in relationships, you don't almost like cling on as if like you desperately need that other person, whether it's in friendships, marriage, anything. You know, people do that even with their kids. They have the kid to fulfill that part of themselves that's missing, or that to fulfill that hole, you know, because they're to complete their self, right? To complete who they are, to complete their understanding of who they are. And so when we learn about ourselves, and even learning about, you know, everybody has unique strengths and abilities. It's our job to reflect on, you know, Allah made you different than me, and Allah made me with certain things that maybe you might not have, and He made you with certain things that I might not have, right? It's our job when we reflect, to reflect on those things. What is it that I have? What is it that Allah has given me? What is it that, so that I can use it, so that I can find a way to benefit myself and benefit those around me. Instead of, you know, waiting on, you know, relationships or friendships to constantly, or other people, or, you know, to provide that for me. Our deen is all about empowerment. And you can't empower yourself without knowing the tools. And I know I repeat this a lot in this lecture, but you can't empower yourself. You can't improve. You can't strive towards change unless you know what tools that you have within you to do those things, right? You can't use those tools unless you know how those tools should function with each other, right? So you can't just look at the mind and say, I'm going to use my mind, right? No, your mind is there to serve your spiritual heart. So have you ever seen people who, they're very smart and they're very intellectual, and they, you know, but they can't feel, they can't really like identify with all the information that they're, you know, so they don't see fruits of it in their lives, right? Because it's, you know, it didn't transfer. To really truly make a change in your life, a spiritual heart, and when I say my change, I mean a meaningful change, a change that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a change that is truly powerful. Your spiritual heart must be the leading force. And that's the only way we can maximize who we are. And this is a reality, you know, this is a reality. And I know sometimes it's like, okay, does that mean I have to always be, you know, in a state of worship? What does that mean? Does that mean I always have to be, you know, like when we think spiritual heart, we think like, my deen has to be on 24/7 for it to be the leading force, right? And it's not, it's a way that you're viewing yourself. It's the way that you're saying, you know what, this is who I am. It's like saying, when we have anything that's manufactured, right? We study how it functions to the best of its ability. And I mean, I don't know the iPhone really well, but I'm trying to think of something that's, anyways, I'll try to think of something. If I think of it, I'll tell you, inshallah. But basically, is that anything that's created or made, it won't function to its maximum ability unless you know what the entities are and how they can interact with each other, right? Because nothing is ever just black and white. You have entities that make up something, but you also know, oh, perfect, you know, like a chair, right? If you took the chair apart, you know that, you know, you have the pieces, right? Just like you have the mind, the self, the spiritual heart. But to put it together and for it to function to the best of abilities, you know that that top part has to be on top, for, you know, that part has to go there. You have to know how those entities interact with each other. So you can never look at yourself and say, well, that's my mind, and that's, no, you have, for us to function for the purpose, for that chair to function and to fulfill its purpose, those entities have to be put together in that order. They have to interact with each other in that specific way. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already prescribed for us how those things should interact. He already has taught us these things in our deen. Allah did not leave anything out. He did not just say, well, these are the entities that I've created for you. No, He taught us what should be the driving force, what should be, you know, what should be the main thing. And so this is something we have to ingrain in our perspective, because, like I said, we can't truly change unless we know what we're working with and the tools we're working with and who we are and the truth of who we are. How much more time? What time do I have?
We still have like 15 minutes.
Okay, inshallah.
Until 9:15 with that.
Okay, inshallah. And so, in viewing ourselves separate from other people, this is one thing that I want to make clear is that one of the most beautiful things that we could do for ourselves is to view ourselves and to try to find our value and our individuality separate from creation, right? Because we often learn that to know who I am, I have to compare, right? We have this comparing tendency, you know, in order for me to know my value or for someone else to, even in schools, I mean, there's just this comparison, you know, tendency, and people know who they are and their value in relation to other people, right? And so even in relationships, we're constantly trying to understand who we are in terms of what that other person's giving me or what I'm giving them, but we need to start viewing ourselves and other people. Everybody's on their own journey. Whether you're in a relationship with them or not, they're on their own journey with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is so beautiful because then everyone becomes their own individual, you know? Sometimes we expect of others what we don't have in ourselves, right? And sometimes we put on to others what we lack within ourselves. We project onto other people. This all comes from our lack of embracing our individuality, our lack of understanding who we are, just me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just trying to understand who, you know, me separate from everything else. Because when we return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's you stand alone, right? So on this journey, we have to learn that, and this is actually a very therapeutic concept. They do this in therapy where they try to, when a person comes to therapy, they try to break down all of the false beliefs that they had about themselves, right? So basically, you have an individual who's learned to define themselves according to maybe what others have told them, right? Maybe how their experiences have shaped them. And so all of these layers upon layers they put on themselves, and this is how that person has understood who they are, in terms of how their relationship with other people, in terms of their experiences with other people. So they come into therapy, and our job, you know, as a therapist, is try to help them understand where did they make these definitions about themselves, right? How did they understand themselves? How did they arrive at this understanding of who they are? And believe it or not, many of us walk around with many false beliefs about ourselves that are so separate from the deen, that is so separate from understanding who Allah is, you know, and it all shapes our worship. It all affects our worship, the way you understand yourself and the way you understand your world and your experiences. These belief systems that we've acquired, that we've never challenged, that we've never explored or reflected upon, we carry with us, and they affect everything we do. And so this is why the attachment comes to the materialistic things, and this is where really the core of attachment comes from. It's the lack of truth and understanding who we are, our purpose, and who we are outside of our relationships, you know. And this is actually one of the things that, you know, causes turmoil in many of the relationships, is people go in and they have this belief system that other person is going to help me, is that I'm going to understand myself within the context of that relationship, when the truth is, throughout our whole lives, our goal is to understand ourselves within the context of one relationship, and that's me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so that filters out so much. This is the way we can start to have peace in our lives, you know? Is that I'm an individual, I'm separate from you, you know? How many times do other people's emotions become ours, or their actions affect us, right? Because we can't stay in a peaceful state if say like a parent sees their kid, one example is a parent sees their kid do something wrong. Some parents, they take that as a reflection of themselves because they've never learned to view themselves separate. That's another individual. You don't own that person, you know? That's Allah owns that person. He's separate from you. He might have your genes and he might have some of your personalities, but he's still separate. He's his own unique person on his own unique journey, you know. And too many times we think that we are helping other people, we're teaching kids, or wallahi, most of the time we're serving ourselves and our nafs, that ego that needs to be sustained. And we tell ourselves that I'm disciplining, or we tell ourselves that I'm helping that person. No, she needs to know this. She needs, you know, we're just projecting. We're just projecting our own deficiencies because we have not took the time to challenge those things that we've acquired over the years because we think that they're true. And it's an illusion. But the closer we strive to Allah, Allah will make us aware of those false layers, because Allah created us on a fitra, you know, and a natural state, on a true state. It's the truth. I always think of truth when I think of fitra. And because each one of us has a true state that's outside, even personality-wise. I mean, how many times we've seen personalities change, right? But people take on other personalities of people because through interaction or experiences, but they're hiding their true personality, right? Their genuineness is hidden. So this is a lack of us truly challenging the things that we've accumulated in our belief systems. And so just to summarize, I want to leave a little bit of time if anybody has any questions, but you know, knowing ourselves and knowing who we are and owning what our deen has to say about who we are, right? Just as you would go to the Quran or the hadith about how to eat, we need to own what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about who we are and how we function, and we need to strive to live our life in a way that serves that vision, that image, that
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله